Today, what one federal official calls a painful report on the worst firefighting disaster in U.S. history, the deaths of more than a dozen firefighters last month on a Colorado mountainside. It is painful because of its conclusion. The deaths were avoidable. Here's ABC's Tom Foreman.
For 6 weeks, investigators have been trying to figure out how the wildfire that swept over Storm King Mountain could prove so deadly, taking the lives of 14 top firefighters. Today, they place the blame on simple human error.
If you look at the situation, you would find a number of places where people could have made judgments or could have provided information that would have allowed it not to occur.
Firefighting safety fundamentals were compromised during a period of extreme weather and fire behavior in a highly flammable fuel type.
The report says leaders of the firefighting teams established inadequate escape routes and failed to adjust their strategy when it became apparent the small blaze they were fighting could explode into a firestorm. Compounding the problem, support agencies were not adequately advising the team leaders of weather and drought conditions.
The fire behavior on July 6th could have been predicted on the basis of fuels, weather, and topography, but the fire behavior information was not requested or provided.
Investigators stopped short of putting the blame on any one person or agency. Instead, they say an overall can-do attitude caused many people to reach beyond the limits of established safety procedures. And that extra effort wound up with tragic consequences. Tom Foreman, ABC News, Denver.
There are also a couple of wildfires burning tonight in Yellowstone National Park. For the most part, firefighters are letting them burn themselves out, a policy that appears to be entirely justified, according to a new study of what has happened to Yellowstone since the devastating fires there 6 years ago. Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
Yellowstone, 1988. Fire devours 800,000 acres, more than a third of the park. Park officials are widely criticized for their policy of allowing fires to burn. But that was then, and this is now.
This is still a Douglas fir forest, as it was before the fire. Instead of having 300-year-old Douglas fir, it's now got 5- and 6-year-old Douglas fir.
Park ecologist Don Despain says the wildfires did exactly what they were supposed to do, and then some. An observation now confirmed by a detailed study on the aftermath of the fires. The 5-year study, funded by the National Geographic Society and the National Science Foundation, concludes that Yellowstone has made a remarkably swift recovery since the fires of '88. In fact, some of the findings surprised even the researchers. For the first time here, aspen trees are sprouting from seeds carried in by the wind and nurtured in the ashy soil. Another surprise, many root systems survived the intense heat and have given new life to wildflowers and plants. Some species actually thrive on fire. Lodgepole pines can only grow when fire forces open the seed cones. And then there are the meadows.
And we're looking at Idaho fescue, a lot of lupin, a lot more sagebrush.
Acres and acres of grasslands, blackened hills just years ago, are once again home to grazing wildlife. Tourists are back, too, in record numbers, many of them drawn to this strange new landscape with a beauty of its own. Ecologists say Yellowstone's experience should serve as a lesson that firefighters should not risk their lives to save something that was never meant to be saved.
The hurricanes are going to blow, the volcanoes are going to erupt, and these kinds of vegetations are going to burn. And I think we have to learn how to live with that.
Learning to live with that means learning not to interfere, to have faith that nature can take care of itself. Judy Muller, ABC News, Yellowstone National Park.
An update today on a story we first reported several years ago about the country's largest supplier of cats to high school biology classes. There were allegations that Carolina Biological was obtaining cats from a dealer suspected of stealing household pets and that some were still alive when embalmed. After an inquiry by the Department of Agriculture, the cat's dealer's license was suspended. A judge said the evidence did not support the embalming charges, but he did fine Carolina Biological for poor record keeping. And when we come back, saving your money by cutting the paperwork. And finally this evening, two small victories in the fight to keep the government from wasting your money. A couple of weeks ago, we reported how hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent on public housing in Washington, D.C., described by the federal government as the worst in the nation in just about every way. A federal judge has agreed. He calls it intolerable and has ordered a court-appointed guardian to take over. Well, the other small victory, the end of government regulation that even the bureaucrats had to admit was merely wasting tax dollars. Here's ABC's John Martin.
The Interstate Commerce Commission regulates buses, trucks, and trains. The ICC was established in 1887, but in 1980, Congress deregulated much of the rail and trucking industries, so the agency has been shrinking from 2,000 employees to 600, and from a budget of $79 million then to $44 million now. Still, there is some splendor. A chamber with vast skylight and exquisite moldings, the bust of a former commissioner, a fading old map with all 48 states. About once a month, the chamber comes alive. The staff assembles. Commissioners ask questions. Aides take notes. Two items this day: whether to exempt the shipment of rock salt and grease from regulation. The decision? Yes. Elsewhere, people squeeze into offices to work on 600 pending cases, among them several railroad mergers. Even critics admit some of this work is needed, but even defenders admit one task is not.
The Motor Carrier Act of 1980 retained tariff filing requirements for trucking companies.
And that means a carrier that comes into the business has to tell you what it's going to charge?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Does that make any sense?
No, I don't think it does.
Even so, by law, every trucking firm in America must file all its prices, called tariffs. But because the ICC no longer controls rates, clerks just file them away. Guess how many pages one company filed on just 3 routes?
We come up with a total estimate of 67,700 pages.
Last week, a congressional committee decided these filings are unnecessary, paving the way to cut ICC's budget by nearly 1/3. So there's good news for a change. Congress will save about $14 million of your money. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
Well, that's our report on World News tonight. Later on Nightline, the Benjamin Chavis story, a crisis in leadership at the NAACP. I'm Catherine Cryer. For all of us at ABC News, good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.